Hey guys, Tyler here. There are few characters in the Star Trek franchise as intriguing as Flint the Immortal. First seen in the original series episode Requiem for Methuselah, Flint is revealed to be over 6,000 years old, having lived as several notable figures in history, including Alexander the Great, Leonardo da Vinci, Johannes Brahms, and others. During his time on Earth, Flint made some of the greatest contributions to human civilization and knew people who made similar contributions. He witnessed the birth and death of multiple empires and fell in love hundreds of times. Above all else, he experienced the gamut of the human condition, seeing things in many lifetimes that most people shouldn't have to see in one. But as fascinating as Flint's journey is, it nonetheless brings up some fundamental questions that challenge the narrative presented in Requiem for Methuselah. Namely, with many of Flint's aliases having rather well-documented childhoods, how could Flint have lived the lives of so many men, especially famous ones from Earth's history? That is one of the questions I'm going to answer today in this video about the life and times of Flint the Immortal. Flint was born as Akron in Mesopotamia in 3834 BC. Flint describes his early years in Mesopotamia as that of a fool and a bully. Akron was a soldier who was part of a Sumerian military force. Sometime before 3800 BC, likely at the age of 30, Akron was felled in battle, but discovered that he was impervious to injury and could not die. Armed with this knowledge, Akron began to assume multiple identities, living in the region of Sumer as a warrior king with aspirations of power and conquest. The source of Flint's immortality is unknown, but based on the nature of Flint's claims to existence on Earth and Dr. McCoy's medical assessment, his regenerative abilities result from a balance of genetic mutation and Earth's delicate magnetic fields. This is the primary reason that Flint is seen to have aged about 30 years by the time of the episode, but likely retained an early 30s complexion during the prime of most of his lives. Following the initial period of Flint's existence, he assumes one of the first identities that we recognize as a famous ruler from Earth's history. This is none other than Methuselah, the biblical character who is said to have lived 969 years. Just as with the other lifespans listed in the Old Testament, this figure seems rather excessive, even for Flint, who realistically would have raised suspicions with such a lengthy amount of time. It's likely that he lived as Methuselah between 80 and 100 years, assuming that biblical years are equivalent to some other evenly divisible metric like lunar cycles. Flint's reign as Methuselah would have also inspired the Sumerian king Ubaratutu, son of the Sumerian equivalent of Enoch, and king of Sumer during the late 4th or early 3rd millennium BC. Both kings' reigns end with a great deluge, a flood such as the one in the Black Sea region that may have inspired the story of Noah. Flint may have had a son as Methuselah who inspired the character Lamech, though it's difficult to discern whether this is true given the haziness of the dates involved. This does, however, leave open the possibility that Flint's descendants may have contributed to the genealogical line of Jesus, even if this Jesus is simply the historical one as opposed to the one described in the Gospels. Of course, this still does not answer the question as to how Flint could have been Alexander or Da Vinci or Brahms, or really anyone else for that matter. To resolve this, we must simply turn to Flint himself, who describes how he would live a portion of a life, pretend to age, and then fake his own death before assuming another identity. We can speculate that Flint would have assumed the identities of already living persons who died or disappeared at some point in their lives. It's possible that Flint would have also lived as the Greek warrior Achilles from the Iliad. Achilles' invulnerability, while not present in the writings of Homer, would have inspired Homer to describe Achilles as the son of an immortal nymph. Fighting in the Trojan War, the story of Achilles would survive into Greek mythology alongside the exploits of the Greek gods and other heroes, as hinted in another episode of the original series, Who Mourns for Adonais? These events likely occurred around 2700 BC, as Apollo says it's been 5,000 years since members of his race visited Earth. Eventually, Flint would go on to assume the identity of King Solomon, as referenced in Requiem for Methuselah. He then returns to the Greek region and comes to know Socrates, before setting his sights on the family of Macedonian king Philip II. This is where the hypothesis presented earlier could be applied. It is possible that Flint kills Alexander after his father's death and assumes Alexander's identity, going on to forge his empire in its place, and assuming the throne of the fallen king. When Alexander is killed in 323 BC via poisoning, this is where Flint would make his escape. Weeping that he has no more lands to conquer, Flint adopts one identity after another before returning to Israel, where he inspires the biblical character of Lazarus after he is reanimated. In the years leading up to his residence in Constantinople, Flint seems to lie low, although he would later exaggerate some of his accomplishments and the identities that he assumed, such as the wizard Merlin, a fictitious individual based on an amalgamation of people who lived during the 5th and 6th centuries AD. After witnessing the Black Death, it's possible that Flint assumes the identity of Johannes Gutenberg, inventor of the printing press, which would explain how he obtains an original copy of the Gutenberg Bible. As a matter of fact, historical records conflict on Gutenberg's whereabouts for the 15 years after the death of his father. It's possible that after Gutenberg disappears, Flint takes his place. Flint pretends to die as Gutenberg and is buried near the Franciscan church at Mainz in Germany. His grave is later lost when the church and cemetery are destroyed, erasing any evidence of Flint's escape. By 1476, a young Leonardo da Vinci is charged with sodomy and, although acquitted, goes missing for nearly 2 years, during which time Flint could have met with him and assumed his identity before returning to Florence. Flint fakes the death of his alias Leonardo and is buried in France. He reanimates himself and flees the area, leaving behind the skeleton of another man that is later excavated, placing doubt among the general population as to the real whereabouts of Leonardo's remains. Over the next couple centuries, Flint comes to know the scientist Galileo and acquires a first folio of the works of William Shakespeare, although it is unknown if he had contact with the Klingons during this time.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
As for Brahms, it's a little more difficult to pin down exactly when he would assume Brahms' identity, since Brahms had a rather well-documented childhood, and nearly every year of his life is similarly well-documented. Nevertheless, Flint also lives as the scientist Abramson in the 22nd century, whose name is remembered by members of the Enterprise crew 100 years later, and was featured in the script for a would-be episode of Enterprise's 5th season, in which his identity would have been revealed to Phlox. Finally, under the alias Brack, Flint purchases the planet Holberg 917G in the Omega system and lives with a series of female android companions before encountering the Enterprise. As explained in the episode, Flint's absence from the delicate balance of Earth's magnetic fields has caused him to age considerably. His absence from Earth for so long has also left him bitter towards humanity, having witnessed throughout history the cyclical nature of human behavior. He verbally spars with Kirk during a game of billiards over just how far humanity has come.
Look at your starship, bristling with weapons. Its mission to colonize, exploit, destroy if necessary to advance Federation causes.
Our missions are peaceful, our weapons defensive.
Some of the same themes can also be found in Star Trek Beyond and other later installments of Star Trek. The idea that the Federation's benevolence and peacekeeping efforts can be juxtaposed with its militarism and expansionist nature. Flint's legendary exploits often leave a lot of details to the imagination, especially regarding mythological figures and even people with pretty well documented early lives. What Requiem for Methuselah does offer, however, is a certain level of intrigue that I think would certainly make for an interesting miniseries. And it's a perfect showcase of how bold the original series could get with some of its premises, sharing a lot of similarities with The Twilight Zone. Indeed, it'll be interesting to see how Strange New Worlds tackles this dynamic, since the Enterprise seems to have a knack for encountering a lot of truly weird phenomena. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, please be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, then becoming a member or a patron is a great way to do so. Links to those, as well as my social media and my merch store, are in the description below. That's about all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.